Okay, so the double's inside the human being, and it influences what the I decides to do, what the ego decides to do in life. And in addition to that, this influence comes out into the world. And I'm going to give a big specific example of that in general. I mean, obviously, the Luciferic double, for example, will attack an individual and it'll say, "Oh man, don't you just want to get high?" And the Aromatic double will be over there saying, "Oh, you're such a shit, you're so weak. You can't handle your life. Look what you did to your wife yesterday." And the Luciferic double will say, "Well, why don't we just escape, light up that joint, take that speed, take that methamphetamine, do whatever it is that you're going to do to get away from yourself." Well, of course, you can't ever get away from yourself. If you do AA work, that's very, very clear. You can't get away from yourself, so people need to just really wake up to that, okay? Now, the thing is that it's not just the Luciferic and the Aromatic doubles that come through us into the world. Remember, we're working off a statement of Steiner's where he said we got to come awake in the fifth post-Atlantean epoch to what comes into the world through us. Okay, so, and we're talking about how influences come through us because of the activity of the double in relationship to the I. And of course, this isn't all just outrageous, bad, evil stuff. Most people have an intact conscience. Now we can study sociopaths and psychopaths and discover situations where the conscience is kind of obliterated for one reason or another in the dynamics of the psychological life of a human being. And we also know that by habit, certain circumstances will cause us to, at least apparently, dim our conscience. Let's take a typical kind of example that people are sort of aware of today. Because we're not just talking about the double being active, but we're talking about the superconscious element of our soul life. That is the upper, higher ego, which comes into the dynamics of our life, into the lower ego as conscience. At a certain phase of development, for example, and you'll find this in my writings on discipleship and the idea of the joyous celebration of the soul art and music of discipleship, that one can learn to practice what might be called participated conscience. That is, the lower I tries to marry the upper I. There's a kind of marriage that's possible of the lower I and the upper I. Participated conscience. Okay, so anyway, and people do this instinctively. A lot of this stuff is done instinctively, and particularly the American soul, because of the things that we can understand through Rudolf Steiner about the American soul. And English-speaking people are, in the conscious soul of their life of rights, and Americans are natural anthroposophists, and all that kind of stuff you'll find in my book, American Anthroposophy. So it's not, like, let's not get too carried away. But anyway, I know this better being a man. It's a little different in a certain way for women because of the differences between men and women, but there are sort of universal things here, and So anyway, so I worked in various business environments. I worked for corporations a couple different times, insurance companies, and while working for insurance companies, I was tempted to do things that violated my conscience. And this was troubling, and but it's not uncommon. And of course, we live now in this time in which the whole world is kind of collapsing because of enormous forces that went on in battles began in battles inside human beings. The economic crisis that we're aware of begins with battles inside human beings where they're tempted to do certain kinds of things that are sort of very, very selfish, and they're also encouraged to think about certain things in a very absolute facts fashion, which is what the Ahrimanic double does, and all this is manifested into society. And this is one of the things I want to talk about. Now I'm going to get a little more deeply into this as we go along, because again, we need to wake up to what takes effect through us. And not only do these things which affect society in ways that we don't particularly like the current economic crisis and all that goes with the end of Western civilization and all the stuff like that I've developed through my social research, which has been so difficult to get the society to pay any attention to at all. But over here in Real Anthroposophy, we'll get into that stuff. But anyway, so here's the double being active, and on the superconscious or the conscience also being active, and a kind of war goes on in the human being. And one of the things that Rudolf Steiner said is that, well, the Luciferic double and the Ahrimanic double have a lot of, shall we say, influence on human existence. There's an area where we might say the heart chakra is, and they can't touch it. And if you recall, I said things about, like how the mother mandates a certain lawfulness with regard to the hierarchies of evil. She's on the other side of the interior spheres of the earth, and of course those aren't the physically interior spheres. It's like I'm here in a physical body, and my soul life is interior, but it's not physically interior. It's spiritually and soully, interior. And so the interior spheres of the earth are likewise not physically interior. They're soulfully and spiritually interior. And on the depths of that, the mother exists, and she controls, you might say, the lawfulness. And part of the lawfulness is that these beings are not able to enter into the region of the heart, which is one of the other reasons why Steiner says things like we need to practice hard thinking. If we leave the heart out, then we get a kind of cold thinking. And of course, this is what we experience when we look at the kinds of things that are done recently, like by people in the banking industries and the business industries, is those social cultural forms and the dynamics that go on with them have brought about a certain kind of cold, callous, and indifferent thinking. And when I get into this will be a little further along when I talk about Ahriman's incarnation. We'll discuss this more. But anyway, but there are counters to that. That isn't the only kind of thinking that goes on in the world. And let's step back and pause, and I'll come back and